So, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've noticed that I tend to focus on big picture stuff, don't I? Organizational change, building design culture, and getting stakeholder buy in. But this week, I want to do something different and get into the weeds with the subject of generative imagery, a tool that has become part of my daily workflow. But I'm genuinely curious to know whether you prefer that big strategic content stuff or practical how to pieces, or maybe a bit of both. And so I was wondering if you could drop me an email to paul@boagworld.com, letting me know what you think and where I should be going in the future. But let's talk about generative AI because it's quickly becoming an essential tool in the modern designer's toolkit. Whether you're a UI designer crafting interfaces, a UX designer building prototypes, or a marketer creating campaign visuals, the ability to generate exactly the image you need rather than settling for whatever stock libraries happen to have is genuinely useful. Now, there is a bit of an ethical dilemma here, which makes me feel a bit uncomfortable because using generative imagery does, in theory, take work away from illustrators and photographers. And I don't love that. But I also recognize this is a pattern that we've seen throughout history. Technology has constantly made certain professions more niche rather than making them disappear entirely. Blacksmith still exists, for example. We still buy vinyl records. And I suspect custom photography and illustration will follow the same path, becoming more specialized rather than vanishing completely. Besides, if we're being realistic, most of us aren't commissioning custom photography for every project anyway. We're pulling images from stock libraries, and I can't say I'm going to miss spending 45 minutes searching for a photo that is almost the exact one that I want, but the person's looking in the wrong direction. So with that acknowledged, let's get into the practical side of things. Before diving into how to use these tools well, it is worth noting that you shouldn't use them all the time. Generative imagery has no place if you're representing real people or real events. If you're showing an actual team or documenting a real conference or depicting genuine customer stories, you're going to need real photography. Anything else would be misleading and your audience can normally spot it anyway. For everything else, though, generative imagery offers some serious advantages over traditional stock photography. You can get exactly the pose you want in exactly the style you need and matching your specific color palette. No more, this photo would have been perfect if only the person was looking to the left instead of the right. This matters more than you might think, because research suggests that users form initial impressions of a website in roughly 50 milliseconds, and that's not enough time to read anything. So those snap judgments are based entirely on imagery, layout, color, and typography. The right image doesn't just look nice, it shapes how people feel about an entire site before they even process a single word. Also, imagery can be a powerful tool in directing attention. A well-chosen image can guide users towards your key content or calls to action in a way that feels natural rather than pushy. Now, before you start generating images for client works, you need to understand the legal landscape. And yes, this is all a little murky. The short version, most major AI image generation platforms allow commercial use when you create images, but the terms vary. Midjourney, for example, allows commercial use for paid subscribers, while something like Adobe Firefly positions itself as commercially safe because it's trained on licensed content and Adobe stock images. Then there's things like Google Nano Banana Pro, which is accessible through Gemini, which also permits commercial use. The murkier issue is around training data. Several ongoing lawsuits are challenging whether AI companies had the right to train their models on copyrighted images in the first place. These cases haven't yet been resolved, and depending on how they play out, the landscape could shift. But for now, my practical advice is this: use reputable tools with clear commercial terms, avoid generating images that deliberately mimic a specific artist or a recognizable style, and keep an eye on the legal situation as it develops. For most who are producing standard commercial work like website imagery, marketing material, and UI mockups, you should be absolutely fine. So when selecting your AI model, you are essentially balancing two considerations. You're looking at stylistic output and instructional accuracy. Every model has its own aesthetic fingerprint, for want of a better word. No matter how specific your prompts are, Midjourney images are going to have a certain look, and Nano Banana images are going to have a different one. You need to find the model whose default aesthetic works for your projects and your personal taste. The other consideration is how well the model follows detailed instructions. If you need a specific composition, for example, a person on the left looking to the right holding a cup of coffee with a window behind them, some models will handle that brilliantly, while others will give you something that vaguely resembles your request, but took a lot of creative liberties that you didn't ask for. The frustrating reality is you rarely get both of these things in one model. The models that are most pleasing aesthetically tend to be worse at following precise instructions and vice versa. And this is why I often move between different models in a single workflow. I'll generate an initial image on Midjourney because I like its aesthetics, and then bring the image into Nano Banana Pro as a reference and use its stronger instruction following capabilities to refine the specific details. That is, of course, an extra step, but it gets you the best of both worlds. Now, there are plenty of tools out there, but here are 3 that I recommend depending on your needs and experience levels. The first one I've already mentioned, which is Midjourney. It produces what I consider the most aesthetically pleasing results, particularly for images of people or anything photographic. It's what I use on my own personal website, but the downside is that Midjourney is frankly terrible at following detailed instructions. Ask for something specific and you'll get something beautiful that bears only a passing resemblance to what you requested. It's also only available through their own website, so you can't access it on any of the multi-model platforms out there. Second is Nano Banana Pro, which is accessible through Google Gemini, and is the opposite of Midjourney. It's remarkably good at following detailed prompts, so you can specify gaze direction, facial expression, items held, position, anything you can imagine, basically. It can also produce transparent PNGs, which is genuinely useful for UI work where there needs to be images overlapping on, say, colored backgrounds. The aesthetic isn't quite as refined as Midjourney, in my opinion, but for many, that's a trade-off worth making. However, if you're starting out, I'd recommend looking at a tool like Krea. That's Krea, in case you were wondering. It gives you access to multiple models, letting you experiment and find out which one works best for your particular needs. You can try different approaches without committing to a single tool subscription. Unfortunately, Krea doesn't include Midjourney. In fact, no other platform does because Midjourney doesn't allow its model to be used by third parties. But it's still a great way to explore the landscape. How you write your prompts depends largely on what model you're using. For instruction following models like Nano Banana Pro, you can get quite detailed, describing composition, subject position, expression, what they're holding, lighting, background, and even camera type if you want. The model will make a genuine attempt at delivering all of that. It won't be perfection every time, but you'll get something workable more often than not. For aesthetic-focused models like Midjourney, simpler prompts are often better. Focus on the overall mood, the style, the subject matter, rather than precise positioning. Fighting against a model's creative tendencies usually produces worse results than actually working with them and going with it. One of the most useful techniques, particularly with models that struggle to follow detailed instructions, is reference imagery. Most tools allow you to upload an image prompt, which is an existing image that contains elements you want. The model will attempt to recreate those elements in whatever style you then specify, incorporating any changes you've requested. It's a way of showing the model what you're after rather than trying to describe it with words. Even a sketch is often enough. Even more valuable is the style reference feature. If you want to produce multiple images that all share a consistent visual identity, which you almost certainly do on any real project, you create one image that nails the style you're after and then use the image as a style reference for every subsequent image afterwards. This keeps your visuals cohesive rather than having each image feel like it came from a different designer. If you haven't experimented with generative imagery yet, now is a good time to get started. Sign up for something like Cree and generate a few images for a project that you're working on and compare them to what you would have got out of a stock library. You'll probably find some results are worse, but some will be surprisingly good, and you will start developing an intuition for how to use these tools. That intuition is valuable. Generative imagery isn't going away anytime soon, and designers who learn to use it well will have a genuine advantage over those who don't. Not because AI will replace your skills, but rather it gives skilled designers another tool to work with.